morning, everybody, and welcome to our second installment of our South African Food Lab. My name is Ryan Fisher. I'm a professional officer at ICLE Africa, focused on urban systems, particularly our food systems portfolio. And it's my pleasure to welcome you, as I mentioned, to the second South African Food Systems Lab, which focuses on streamlining multi-level food systems governance between various levels of government and, of course, other key actors. As I mentioned, this is the second dialogue in South Africa. We had the first part in July this year, and there was a call, of course, to have more in-depth discussion around multi-level governance, and that is why we're here today. The session is being recorded, and by participating, you're automatically consenting to being recorded. So we hope that you will enjoy the session with us, and please do participate as best possible. We have a packed program today, very exciting lineup, or as I like to call it, menu of speakers, and we're really looking forward to having rich and fulfilling discussions, and we hope that you will find it this 3 hours with us, which seems long, but experience has shown that it passes by so quickly. But we believe that you will enjoy the session with us, and of course find it very valuable. I don't want to speak too much, and I'll ask my colleague a little bit later, Ivan, who's going to just set the scene for us in terms of the dialogue and how we got here through today. But perhaps before we get delve into the program, I see there are still people joining us. Welcome. I do want to ask that you do participate. We have a massive, we're expecting quite a big turnout. If the registration numbers are anything to go by, there'll be some old faces and some old friends with us, but also some new faces. I think we've got a lot of requests and comments and inputs from organizations we haven't worked with on the topic of food systems. So we're very much looking forward to inviting you into the discussion and into this platform. I do want to urge you, as we always feel with these virtual sessions, that it is obviously difficult to coordinate everyone's participation, but please do use the chat to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, what your thoughts and comments on the overall theme and topic of today's webinar, and also see this as a networking opportunity to grow your network, and as I mentioned, to be part of this beast that we call coordinated food systems governance. So very excited by our lineup of speakers, and as I just want to reiterate, please do engage as freely as you want using the chat. If you can direct specific questions or comments to a specific speaker, that will of course help streamline things. We will also share a link to a mural board, and our hope and plan is that in itself will evolve as the session goes on, to sort of capture the main outputs and income and inputs, and of course provide us with a little bit of a structure in terms of what we then use that information for. Now we then share that widely. So my colleagues will share that link in the chat, and you are more than welcome to of course engage and participate in that regard. So I hope you will enjoy the session with us. As I mentioned, it's a packed session, but we hope that it will be, you'll find it useful and fruitful. Without any further ado, I am going to call on our partners, FAO, Mr. Mlati, who's been our friend for a couple of years now. We work quite closely with on urban food systems. And Mr. Mlati is our focal point, our South Africa focal point for FAO. And as I mentioned, our relationship has now spanned a couple of years and seems to grow by the day and by the month. So we're quite excited and looking forward to Mr. Mlati, to your opening remarks and to set us on our way. So without further ado, and with those words, I want to invite Mr. Mlati to please share with us.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher, Master of Ceremony. Representatives from the national and provincial governments, academia and research institutions, NGOs, community-based organizations, private sector, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be given the opportunity to officially open South Africa Food Systems Lab Dialogue 2022 on strategies for streamlining multi-level food system governance between local and national government in South Africa on behalf of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. The dialogue came at a time when the South African food system has and still experiencing a series of shocks in the past years that have greatly impacted food and nutrition security in the country. These include severe droughts resulting into water shortage, the COVID-19 pandemic, and associated lockdown restrictions, the civil unrest of 2021 in Gauteng and KZN, the impacts of the Russia-Ukraine conflict on international and local food and commodity prices, as well as the recent flooding in KwaZulu-Natal. All of these events have had devastating impacts on the country's food system and foregrounded the extent to which vulnerable actors in the food system are disproportionately exposed to exogenous shocks. A sustainable food system lies at the heart of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The SDG call for major transformations in agriculture and food systems in order to end hunger, poverty, achieve food security, and improve nutrition by 2030. Protecting the planet and fighting inequality is also at the center of SDGs, while ensuring that no one is left behind. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations recognizes that food systems to encompass the entire range of actors and their interlinked value-adding activities involved in the production, aggregation, processing, distribution, consumption, and disposal of food products that originate from agriculture, forestry, or fisheries, and parts of the broader economic, societal, and natural environment in which they are embedded. A sustainable food system is a food system that delivers food security and nutrition for all in such a way that the economic, social, and environmental basis to generate food security and nutrition for future generations are not compromised. This means that it is profitable throughout economic sustainability. It has also broad-based benefits for society, and it has a positive or neutral impact on the natural environment. To realize the aforementioned SDGs, the global food system needs to be reshaped to be more productive, more inclusive of poor and marginalized populations, environmental, sustainable, and resilient, and able to deliver healthy and nutritious diets to all. These are complex and systemic challenges that require the combination of interconnected actions at the local, national, regional, and global levels. South Africa is epitomized by rising poverty levels, spiraling unemployment rate, and broadening inequality that remain apex challenges confronting its society. The civil unrest that occurred in South Africa in KZN and Gauteng provinces from 9 to 17 July 2021 have affected food system. Some businesses may take years to be rebuilt, according to industry groups. Both these economic hubs make up to half of national gross domestic product and almost half of the country's population. The port of Durban in KZN handles 70% of the country's imports and is a gateway to Southern Africa. The port was affected by disruptions. Against the above-mentioned background, the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development requested the FAO's assistance in promoting inclusive and sustainable food systems that will contribute to rebuilding economies of KZN and Gauteng provinces following unrest that disrupted food system. The specific forecast from the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development is on the following: promoting the importance of food production in various communities for self-sufficiency, raising awareness on nutrition, improve access to food in order to ensure food security and the right to food as enshrined in South Africa's constitution. Support the ongoing food systems dialogue convened at national and provincial levels by bringing it to district levels. Also improve district capacities to ensure that government's district development model elevate food systems. And then also building capacities or empower extension officers and farmers on importance of food system and popularizing it in the provincial World Food Days. The expected outcome of interventions are on final strategy or recommendation of inclusive and sustainable food systems in rebuilding economies of KZN and Gauteng provinces, and a 5-year implementation plan developed. Also to build capacities of stakeholders on inclusive and sustainable food systems in rebuilding economies of KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng provinces. eClear Africa has enjoyed a productive professional relationship with FAO and is currently involved in the project. And it has worked with our Southern Africa region, the regional office in Ghana, as well as headquarters. And one of the major projects was on the completion of the FAO-funded city-to-city food system exchange project in 2018. And then the completion of the investing in African urban food systems project and other related projects. I'm glad that today's event is part of the project on promoting inclusive and sustainable food systems that will contribute to rebuilding economies of KZN and Gauteng provinces. Following unrest that disrupted food system, it will benefit greatly from your experiences in different provinces, as it will build and consolidate the processes and mechanisms for promoting multi-stakeholder dialogues on urban food system as a follow-up to the UNFSS established in Africa and Latin America. In so doing, the project will contribute to strengthening South Africa's food systems, governance linkages between local and national level for improved resilience. These engagements aim to strengthen collaboration between different levels of governance and to enhance cooperation and peer-to-peer learning between different cities and provinces for improved food system resilience. I wish you fruitful and productive discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mlati, for those opening and inspiring words. Also, always very well time management there, so well done on that, Mr. Mlati. I know you also have other engagements today, so we do appreciate you availing yourself to be with us this morning. Maybe just to touch on what Mr. Mlati said. So we have received a unique opportunity to develop recommendations and strategic actions for improving food systems resilience on a national level. And therefore we would like to invite all participants in this meeting to join us for an update session and an input session on that opportunity towards the mid of October. So just to put that on your radar, that you will receive a communication to that regard. So we're looking forward and quite excited to that, to seeing that piece of work unfold. And we of course value your contributions and input into that process as well. So please do look out for that communication in the coming days. As I mentioned, we have a packed program. Again, Mr. Mlati, thank you for setting the scene for us. We did also invite our National Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development to join us, Mr. Peter Ramolota. If you are on the call, please just give me an indication. Otherwise, we'll ask if there is a representative from the National Department who has joined us this morning. Otherwise, we'll have to move on with the program. National Department of Agriculture represented? Otherwise, we'll give the department an opportunity at the later stage if they do join. But in the interest of time, I'll call on my colleague, Ivan Poe, to do a quick snapshot of the outcomes from the first session, as I mentioned, the first lab on the 21st of July, which feels like ages ago now. And just to share with us some of the outcomes of that and to place today's workshop into context. So, Ivan, welcome and over to you.
Thanks very much, Ryan. Appreciate it, and thanks very much, colleagues, for joining this session today. It's a very interesting and timely session, taking into consideration everything that's happening with food, with the World Food Days coming up, all of the departments associated with food being very busy in preparation for that. So we appreciate your attendance, and we also appreciate your inputs throughout the session. We want to try and make this as engaging as possible. So I'm just going to quickly give a background on the Dialogues project and the Food Systems Lab and the process that brought us here today. Just an overview of the first engagement, who we had, what we spoke about, the idea behind that, and then also the aims of today and the way in which we hope to convene this in order to ensure we reach our overarching aim, which in essence is to develop and highlight concrete strategies and actions for streamlining multi-level food systems governance and strengthening the role and agency of local governments in developing their own priorities and actions and strategies around developing more sustainable, inclusive, and resilient food systems. So just a little bit of background on the Urban Food Systems Dialogues. This round of this year's of dialogues is a follow-up to the dialogues that were convened last year as part of the United Nations Food Systems Summit. And in partnership with the Food and Agriculture Organization, ICLE Africa, as well as ICLE South America, have convened another round of food system dialogue, this time with a variety of cities in three different countries in both Africa and Latin America. In Africa, we work in South Africa, in Kenya, and in Senegal. And we convening our second round of food systems labs in each of those countries in the following weeks as well. Also around this issue of streamlining multi-level governance and improved coordination between the national and the local level. Each country with its very unique challenges in this regard, but also very, very unique and different opportunities. So there's kind of three components to this. The first being the Urban Food Systems Lab, which will be taking place in the selected countries. This is where we are today. The idea behind this lab is very much to create a platform for mutual exchange and mutual learning. Apologies, I was muted. Toward creating greater coordination in terms of policy implementation and policy design with relation to food systems between the national, provincial, and local level. Then there's also the city-to-city exchanges, which we've already convened in July as part of the Africa City Food Month. We had one which was a city-to-city exchange between different cities in the African continent. We had participants from eThekwini, from Nairobi, from Senegal, a city called Bambilo. So we had a very interesting mix of participants there. And then we also had a south-to-south city exchange where we had a few different cities from South America engaging with cities here in the African continent, very much also around this issue of local food systems governance, and then the greater idea of multi-level governance and how national governments could be supporting local governments in developing these localized strategies for food systems. And finally, we have the twinning, which is very much about creating a long-term cooperative working relationship between a Portuguese-speaking city in Africa, which we are working with Quilimane quite closely, and then a Portuguese-speaking city in Latin America, in Brazil, which we have Marica, and we're in the process of really building this relationship now. As part of the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact, we're going to bring the mayor of Quilimane and high-level officials of Marica together, organizing trips there. And what's really exciting about this is this opportunity for mutual learning between these cities. Marica, as far as I'm concerned, are really implementing some groundbreaking initiatives around food systems and developing more sustainable food systems. And I would invite you all to have a look at that. So just to give a little bit of a roadmap of where we are in this process, we are currently in the second round of our food systems labs here between September and November. And very, very importantly, what we intend to do with these labs is to really garner all of the findings and use them and structure them in a way that we can bring the participating cities and also having ICLEI Africa and ICLEI Latin America to participate and represent these cities and delivering some of the key outcomes from these sessions which would very much be around the concrete strategies and actions that we've identified for streamlining this thing we call multi-level governance, which I'll dive into a little bit later, just very briefly. So just to give an idea to the participants what it is that we're after is, as you see here, these are the key outcomes that emerged from the independent dialogues from the United Nations Food Systems Summit last year. We've identified 5 key strategic areas for urban food systems transformation, and then also the critical actions, which I guess we are really much after here, because these conversations are great and very, very stimulating, and we learn a lot. But if they don't lead to action, then many can argue that they're futile. So when looking at these critical actions, the first one, and the one that's actually received a lot of prioritization, is the development of coherent integrated food policies and invite multi-stakeholder engagement in this process, especially on a local level. But when looking at many of these strategic areas and critical actions, one can see how there's a strong sense of governance coming through, and collaborative governance. And that's really why we are here today, to have this conversation around food systems, and why collaborative and multi-level governance is such an important consideration for us to develop more sustainable food systems, and bringing all these different perspectives together. And I think it's very exciting having this engagement when looking at the representation and the diversity of perspectives that we have in the room today. I'm sure we'll develop very rich outcomes. And in essence, what we hope to produce from this lab is a very similar kind of infographic, but specifically focused on this idea of collaborative multi-level governance relating to food systems, and it's really strengthening the role and agency of local governments in the food systems governance process, and also the policy formulation around food systems initiatives. So in a nutshell, the first Food Systems Lab was convened on the 21st of June, and I'm sure many of the participants that are here today will also participated in that one. This first lab was very much around contextualizing the extent of multi-level food systems governance in South Africa. We had representatives from the National Department, the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, that offered a brief presentation on the food systems pathways, which was really kind of one of the key outcomes of the Food Systems Summit, and the national commitment made by National Department of Agriculture in partnership with a few other departments around what are the key strategies and the focus areas for South Africa on a national level for developing more sustainable food systems and meeting our global commitments in terms of food more particularly. Then we also had speakers from 3 different provinces in South Africa to really get an idea of some of the food systems initiatives that are being driven within these provinces. We had KwaZulu-Natal, Gauteng, and Western Cape, and these presentations were also really brought together by delivery from the Peter Maritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity Group, where Mr. Mervyn Abrams delivered a presentation really on this issue of household food insecurity. Now, it's one of the key kind of factors that jeopardize the greater resilience of the South African food system. This was then also followed by a discussion in breakout rooms, where we really explored some of the key questions we hoped to answer, which was around this issue of multi-level governance. Now, what we found in this lab was really that one of the key challenges faced by South Africa, and that's constraining progress towards streamlining multi-level governance, is really a lack of clear mandates when it comes to food. Now, the food mandate is really vested still on a national level, and to a large extent on a provincial level as well. But this when we're talking about food in a South African context, we're still very much on a policy level, at least, focused on food being a product of rural production, which to a large extent really perpetuates many of the food systems related challenges that we experience, because a lot of the focus on the policy level on food is around agriculture and not really taking the greater food system into consideration, which includes, as Mr. Mlati also alluded to, the processing, the distribution, the retail, and the consumption, which have a wide variety of externalities and outcomes, most particularly talking about the environmental side, and then also this issue of food and nutrition security. Another major challenge that has been identified in this regard is also that it diminishes the importance of food within the urban context, where food is not really being implemented and integrated into this idea of urban design and spatial planning, and this is why through this idea of multi-level governance that we hope to promote and strengthen through this lab, a major part of it is to strengthen the role of local governance, especially the metros across the country and the other urban contexts, where we really see this growing issue of food insecurity, which as we've seen with the COVID-19 pandemic, has increased quite severely, especially when we're looking at the more severe levels of food insecurity. And another important consideration that also came out of this lab is that on a policy formulation level, South Africa is still very much embedded in a top-down approach, where policies are formulated on a national level and fed and trickled down onto and enforced almost into a local level. But what we're trying to argue for, especially in the context of food, which is such a multifaceted and complex system embedded in greater systems, that these policies really need to be informed by the realities on the ground, which means that local governments, which are really much more closely related to stakeholders on the ground, need to be involved in this policy formulation process and need to be empowered in order to set their own priorities and policies, especially when it comes to issues of food. So we structured this second lab really around some of the key findings that emerged from the first lab, in order to work toward the overarching goal, which is to develop concrete strategies and recommendations for streamlining multi-level governance. Now, how we intend to do this is to really have a conversation around the roles, mandates, and responsibilities of different levels of government in terms of food systems governance. And we got a really interesting and exciting presentation by Mr. Jaap de Visser around this, which will also be strengthened by Mr. Florijn. And then there's also this aim that we hope to promote through this, which is to elevate the prioritization of food systems in existing policy frameworks. Now, when it comes to multi-level governance in South Africa, we've got a rich array or quite strong policy frameworks that are already in place for streamlining multi-level governance. And I'll touch on those a little bit later, but what we found is that food is generally a missing element, especially when we're taking the larger food systems into consideration. They're quite neglected from these policy frameworks that intend to streamline multi-level governance. And then finally, and very importantly, to develop concrete strategies and recommendations for streamlining multi-level governance. Now, this being the overarching aim, so that we can really have something tangible that we can share with our partners and stakeholders from across the continent and the world. Now, multi-level governance, we thought it might be useful for those in the room that aren't really familiar with this concept, because you will be hearing it a lot today, just to briefly touch on what we mean when we talk about multi-level governance. So it's a process of governing, especially in the context of food, where there's a dispersion of authority upwards, downwards, and sideways. Now, what we mean by this is it's an integrated form of governance, where there's vertical integration, horizontal integration, and what we call trans-governmental integration. Now, vertical integration really refers to an integration and a greater extent of coordination and alignment between the different levels of government. In the South African context, we've got national level, provincial level, and local level. And then there's this element of horizontal integration, which is really much about the integration between different departments on each of the levels and alignment between their priorities. When we're talking about issues of food and nutrition security, we can see on this graph that there's quite a lot of different departments actually involved in in this. There's of course agriculture, but then also economic development, energy, water, land use management, and urban planning, education, and health, very importantly as well. And when we work toward a more horizontally integrated governance approach, we will find that it becomes much easier to address some of these goals if we, or these departments at least, don't work in silos, but rather work in alignment in a more coordinated way to achieve these goals. It will also, in terms of resource allocation, when there's specific working groups around food, it's seen that and it is taking place in South African context just to a certain extent, but it really makes this question of budget allocation much easier. Now, one thing that we've learned from engagements with many African countries is a very effective way in which this could be streamlined. And this is just to get some of the thinking going, is through the establishment of multi-stakeholder platforms on a local level. Multi-stakeholder platforms are kind of collectives, or multi-stakeholder collectives, I guess, to call it, that brings together a wide variety and diversity of stakeholders within the food systems with different priorities and ideas, and including in this is government to really inform on a local level what the priorities and areas of immediate response need to be. And there's some very interesting examples of this in Nairobi with the flags, the food liaison advisory groups. In Senegal, there's also the SIGA, which is very much a similar idea around bringing all these different actors from private sector, civil society, commodity groups, farmer unions together into the same room to set these priorities. And there is also instances of this in the South African context, like the Sikuma initiative in KZN that brings together the extension officers, smallholder farmers, and the traditional council around developing specific programs. So there are a lot of opportunities in the South African context, but I guess the question that we need to ask ourselves is, how do we really tap into these existing frameworks and really elevate the role that food actually can play as a component of local economic and social development. So speaking of these existing policy frameworks that aim to streamline multi-level governance, there's two that we've identified that could play a really important role in this. Both of them are being coordinated by the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs. The first, which is a newer one, which was being implemented from 2019, is the district development model, which is an operational model for improving cooperative governance aimed at building a capable, ethical, developmental state. Now, very much this district development model builds on the white paper of local government, which really sets its priorities and mandates, which is to ensure that local government is capacitated and transformed to play a developmental role. Now, the argument that we hope to put forward is, in this developmental role, food and food systems as an incredibly important part to play, whether it is in the urban or in the rural context. Now, there's also the integrated urban development framework, which is more about fostering a shared understanding across government and society on how best to manage urbanization and achieve the goals of economic development, job creation, and improved living conditions. And now what we've seen with the extreme urbanization in South Africa is that is one of the leading drivers of food and nutrition insecurity. And this is why we also really argue for food and greater food systems, and the integration of food into urban planning to be integrated into these frameworks. And we hope to hear from the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs later, as well as SOLGA, which is a little bit more on the role of local governments and what they can do in order to drive sustainability from the bottom up. So that was quite a mouthful. Thanks very much once again for everyone that's here. I will invite you once again to pose any questions that you might have. in the chats. My colleague Sinetemba will also be sharing a link to the mural board. In the mural board, both me and Sine will be working really hard to capture as much of the conversation as possible, especially the key questions and the remaining questions that are unanswered, as well as the key strategies. So please do share that link, Sine. And we also invite everyone to jump on and populate that mural board to their liking. And what we will do, just to ensure that there's a nice flow after and between the sessions, we'll just have a brief 3 to 5 minute reflection on what's busy emerging, what ideas are being shared and exchanged, and just highlighting some of the key actions that are coming up. So whenever there's a light bulb moment in your head and you feel like this is an appropriate idea, please do populate that mural board, or just pop your suggestion into the chat, and we'll ensure that it gets integrated into that. Thanks very much, and I hope you all enjoy the session today. Thanks. Over to you, Ryan.
Thanks, Ivan. Was a mouthful indeed, but I think an important piece of information just to set the scene for us. Great. You spoke about mandates as being a sort of low-hanging fruit, and I think the issue around mandates, particularly in the context of urban food systems, has really been sort of, I think, I don't want to call it over mentioned, but I think it's definitely a grey area which sort of needs to be better understood and unpacked. And we're quite excited to have Mr. Jaap de Visser to talk a little bit about just that around food systems mandates, and sort of what the thinking is about that, and of course how that sort of then relates to sort of policy and action. So I think I know a lot of people are obviously experiencing load shedding, and I know that is a massive issue at the moment. I did see Jaap joining us earlier. Jaap, I just want to check if you are still on the call. Otherwise, we'll definitely come back to Jaap to talk to us a little bit around mandates. Also, just want to reiterate Ivan's call for participants to please participate on the mural. I see there's a lot of activity in the chat already, people sharing their contacts and making connections. To those that have joined us a little bit late, please make use of the chat as best possible. I see there is quite a bit of activity there. There was a question around whether or not the presentation will be shared. Just a reminder that the session is being recorded, and the recording together with the presentations will be shared with participants as we go. I see Jaap has just hopped back on, so maybe let's give Jaap a second or two just to reconnect his audio. Maybe Sinetemba, just a note to you, if you can just reshare the link to the mural, that will be great. Yeah, if you can hear us, you are our next speaker. I've tried to save you a little bit of time to set up. It seems to me, oh, there we go. Good morning, Jaap.
Good morning. Good to be with you. Sorry, I had to duck out quickly. I was
Jaap de Visser, research and expert on local government mandates, and Jaap's going to share a little bit about mandates of local government and how food systems fits into that. So, Jaap, over to you.
Okay. Thanks so much, Ryan. Thanks, Ivan, and good morning to everyone. Apologies for ducking in and out of the meeting. I'm trying to juggle a few things at the same time, but I'm all yours. So I was asked to share some research that I've done on mandates and local government. So I'll get straight into that. So just a little bit about myself. I work at the Dalla Omar Institute at the University of the Western Cape, where aside from heading up the institute, I conduct research and teaching and consulting in the area of intergovernmental relations, local government, in South Africa and elsewhere. And I was asked to share research that I conducted a number of years ago on the intersection of food security and local government. Let me see if I can get my screen up. I hope this is visible on your side. Is it, can I just check, is it visible, and is it also in presentation mode? Because that sometimes goes
Perfect. Yeah, you may continue.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. So let me get straight into it, because time is not on our side. But the presentation that I want to share with you is about municipalities and food security, looking at this from a constitutional angle, and I think it could be a useful introduction or context to discussions around intergovernmental collaboration and stakeholder consultation around local efforts with respect to food security. But obviously my take is going to be a little bit sort of taking it a step back and looking at the constitutional framework. It's based on a chapter that I wrote in this book, edited by Robert Home, Land Issues for Urban Governance in Sub-Saharan Africa. So if you want to look up the detail, you can check this book. And I also want to acknowledge the work of Shiham Johnstone, who did a PhD on this topic. I worked with her on that PhD, and she did a lot of research on this area. So I think I want to acknowledge the work that she did, and partly my work that I'm presenting to you now is based on that PhD. So obviously this is something I don't need to spend a lot of time on in this particular forum, but just to make the point that the Constitution can also serve as a lever to rebut the notion that food insecurity is only a national or provincial government concern. There is still that sort of a view or sentiment or leaning in government that food security is about producing enough food, it's about agriculture, and that therefore it is a national provincial government responsibility, and that local government doesn't really enter the picture. And I want to use constitutional law to essentially rebut that notion. And for that, we need to look at what the Constitution says is the mandate of local government. A local government has a constitutionally defined mandate, which is quite unique on the continent. We don't see a lot of constitutions on this continent, and probably also not elsewhere, that are quite specific about the mandate of local government. But in our Constitution, the powers and functions of local government are listed in two schedules to the Constitution, Schedule 4B and 5B of the Constitution. Very briefly on the slide here. I'll return to this later, so no need to look at this in too much detail right now, but just to show you that, there are those two lists in the Constitution of the powers and functions of local government, and the Constitution protects those powers from interference by other levels of government, but also obviously expects municipalities to perform these powers according to certain minimum standards prescribed by national and provincial government. So these are constitutionally defined mandates of local government. And what's very important is that in principle, municipalities are not permitted to spend their money outside of that mandate, unless there's a specific legal or contractual basis for a municipality to do so. So in principle, the municipality must spend its budget on those mandates that I showed earlier. And to give you an illustration of what that means in practice is, for example, under COVID, there were quite a few municipalities who embarked on the handing out of food parcels. Of course, responding to a desperate need that existed, particularly during the hard lockdown. But there were a lot of questions that were raised and difficulties experienced legally and with audits, etc., when essentially there was an argument that municipalities are not supposed to do that because now they are spending their budget outside of their mandate, and the handing out of food parcels was not seen as being part of the municipal mandate. Now, aside from whether or not that is correct, it's just mentioned as an example to illustrate the notion of municipalities needing to be careful about what they spend their money on. Of course, they need to spend their money prudently and according to the budgets and following the rules, but also whether they are actually sticking to their mandate in terms of the Constitution and other legislation. It's also important because the funding that municipalities raise or receive is generally based on that mandate. There are three key sources of income, operational income for municipalities. Of course, they charge us for their trading services when we purchase water or other types of services from municipalities, electricity, sanitation, sewerage, refuse removal. We pay for that to the municipality, and that is an important source of income for municipalities. Particularly electricity revenue is a key source of revenue for municipalities. They use that to offset the costs of those services, but also to cross-subsidize other services and other activities of the municipality for which they cannot charge, sort of an individual charge. For example, keeping the street lights going is not something that anyone gets charged for individually, but is then funded from other sources of revenue, including these fees for trading services. Another important source of income is property taxation, that those who own property in the municipal jurisdiction pay to the municipality. That is a tax which goes into the municipal budget, and the municipality can appropriate that tax for other services and activities, and of course to keep the administration going. And then thirdly, the municipality receives intergovernmental grants. The most well-known one and the most important one for municipalities is the equitable share, which is a grant that is allocated to municipalities on the basis of a formula. And importantly, the formula assumes that the municipality performs certain services. And that assumption is based on the constitutionally defined mandate of local government, those lists that I showed earlier. So it shows that the system, both in terms of permissibility to spend, but also in terms of the funding that the municipalities receive, assumes certain things about what municipalities are responsible for. So I just want to park that thought for now, and we'll return to that towards the end of the presentation. But now, what does this mean for the right to food? Because I think there are two constitutional points of leverage that can be used to argue that municipalities are brought into the picture by the Constitution itself when it comes to food security, when it comes to the right to food. The first one is specifically relying on the right to food itself. Section 27, 1B of the Constitution says everyone has a right to have access to sufficient food and water. So that is a right that exists, and it doesn't limit that right to a specific sphere of government or a specific organ of state. It is a right that we have vis-a-vis the state as a whole. And I'll return to that later. So the right to food, in my view, brings municipalities into the picture. And secondly, if we look at food security through a food systems approach, again, something I don't need to elaborate on in this forum, I also argue then that brings municipalities into the picture. The first one, the right to food, the argument there is that if we look at how socioeconomic rights are argued and are enforced, so to speak, in our constitutional framework, it's obviously important to start with the way in which the Constitutional Court handled the issue in the Grootboom judgment in 1999, which is the first real successful landmark judgment in socioeconomic rights, dealt with the right to housing, which is also not a local government competency in terms of the Constitution itself, but was argued including municipalities. And a big question that sort of remained unresolved in the Grootboom judgment was who is actually responsible for for the right to housing, because all spheres of government were cited in that case, and the court said, the three of you must make it happen together. Don't bicker about who does what. You must cooperate, make it happen. And the court was not really very specific about who's responsible for what, which probably was the right call to make at that point in time. But then 11 years later, a similar case came to the Constitutional Court in the Blue Moonlight saga, where a community was evicted from private land in the city of Johannesburg. They approached the city of Johannesburg for alternative accommodation. And one of the arguments that the city of Johannesburg made was that they were saying, well, housing is not really our responsibility. It is the responsibility of the national and provincial government. Yes, we are involved in housing, but in terms of the constitution, it is not in our list of mandates. So we are not going to provide alternative accommodation for this community that's been evicted from private land. We didn't evict them. It's a private issue. We're not responsible. The Constitutional Court disagreed and said, no, you are responsible as a city, because there is a right of access to housing in the Constitution. And even though the schedules that set out your constitutional mandate may not list housing specifically, you are responsible because you are part of the state. You are responsible for implementing the right of access to housing to the extent that, of course, is reasonable. So you are responsible, and the city of Johannesburg was instructed to find alternative accommodation for this community that was evicted. So in my view, the argument is that this is an important argument also for the right to food. It means, in my view, that because we have a right of access to food in our Bill of Rights, it means that municipalities cannot escape responsibility for realizing the right to food. They can't say that they're not responsible for agriculture and therefore food security is not their business. Of course, there is a question about funding, and we'll return to that later. But my view, municipalities cannot escape responsibility. Even municipalities can be taken to task in terms of the Bill of Rights for those aspects of food security that intersect with a municipality's constitutional powers. So, in other words, where the municipality has levers, where it has competencies, where it has powers and functions that intersect with the right to food, the municipality can be taken to task and is liable and accountable in terms of the Bill of Rights for using those levers, using those powers, those functions, and those responsibilities in a way that contributes to realizing the right to food in our Constitution. And to unpack what those then are, we have to look at the mandate of local government. We have to look at the powers of local government through a food systems approach. Take on a food systems lens and look again at those lists of powers in the Constitution. And just to reiterate, the powers are listed in Schedule 4B and 5B of the Constitution. Those are the constitutional mandates of local government. These are municipal powers where national and provincial governments may not perform those powers because they are allocated to local governments. They may only regulate what municipalities do in these areas, namely prescribe minimum standards, monitor, intervene if things go horribly wrong, etc., etc. But the responsibility is the municipalities to implement these powers or to execute them within their areas of jurisdiction. Now, if we go back to that list that I showed earlier of those municipal mandates, and we now look at these issues through a food systems lens, I think a lot of mandates will show up as being important for food security. A big one is municipal planning. Municipal planning is essentially the power of municipalities to regulate land use. Land use management and spatial planning is a protected power of local government. And as you can imagine, a critically important issue with respect to food security. Municipal health services is another important area of local government that is critical for food security. Trading regulations, water and sanitation services, of course, licensing and control of undertakings that sell food to the public, but also billboards and the display of advertisements in public places. Municipalities are responsible for regulating the billboards that we see along the highways and wherever you move around through the city and through towns. One can ask the question, can municipalities use that responsibility to enforce certain content being prohibited on billboards? Do we have to advertise for takeaways? Do we have to advertise for unhealthy foods? For example, I'm not a food policy expert. There are many in this room that know much more about this, but I can imagine that there's a role for municipalities to encourage healthy diets and discourage unhealthy diets, and maybe this is one of the levers that they have. But also street trading, markets, abattoirs, refuse removal. I'm sure the policy experts in the room can see lots of linkages between these responsibilities that municipalities have and the effort to ensure food security. So my argument is just based on the constitutional provisions. So in summary, what I would argue is that the South African Constitution itself engages municipalities in the realization of food security along two axes, so to speak. One is the right to food. We have a right to food in the Constitution that also binds municipalities. And if we look at the food systems approach to municipal powers and municipal responsibilities, there are lots of areas where municipal powers intersect with food security matters. As an aside, I think this is also relevant for other jurisdictions that combine devolution with justiciable socioeconomic rights. And think on the continent, Kenya is a country that comes to mind, which also combines these two aspects. So it's interesting to see going forward how the Kenyan jurisdiction will deal with this. I want to end off with this last two questions. The one is, given the fact that municipalities are pulled into the food security debate, so to speak, is the intergovernmental fiscal system responding? When our system assumes, when it comes to finances, assumes that municipalities have certain responsibilities and that they, to a large extent, deal with food security, but also exclude certain important aspects, is there a need to revisit the intergovernmental fiscal system for local government to equip it to better deal with food security issues? And then, of course, and I think it's already mentioned earlier, you know, the importance of pursuing food security, not just through the narrow lens of what is the powers of the municipality, but through intergovernmental collaboration. How can the municipality mobilize the rest of government, national, provincial, state-owned entities, through the integrated development planning and possibly the district development model, to ensure that the whole of government collaborates and works together to ensure food security within the municipal jurisdiction. We have the instruments for it. We have the frameworks. We have a statutory framework in terms of the integrated development planning model. We now also have an operational model in terms of the DDM, driven by the national government and provinces to bring stakeholders together in the municipality to look at how food security can be pursued within that municipal jurisdiction. And of course, there's a lot more that can be said about, you know, whether that works well and whether we have the capacities within the state to have that collaborative approach. But I do think we have the frameworks in place, and I think the constitutional argument is there that municipalities are very much part and parcel of the efforts to realize food security. So that is what I wanted to share with you. I hope it is useful, and I'm handing back to, I guess it's Ryan, eh? Back to you, Ryan.
Thank you very much, Jaap. Absolutely useful. I think there's a couple of clapping hands in the participants. I think, yeah, it clarified a lot of things. I think For us in office here, a couple of light bulb moments, but really informative. I sort of think, you mentioned it in sort of model of your presentation, and the Concord mentioned that, you just have to work together. There's no sort of way around it, and it will be interesting to hear some of the thoughts from the participants on the presentation. But thank you so much for that informative presentation, Jaap, and hopefully you can stick around for us a bit more to maybe engage on some of these key questions around mandates. So yeah, thank you very much for that presentation. To shift focus slightly, I'm going to call on Lorraine Kroll from the Food Imbizo, the Center of Excellence and Plus. Of course, it talks a little bit about the Food Imbizo, touch a little bit around collaborative governance, of course, and a little bit on horizontal learning and multi-level governance. So, Flo, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, what an honor to be able to contribute towards this event, and also to follow on the presentation by such an illustrious speaker. Jaap has played a major role, I think, in shifting perspectives in the city of Cape Town around the different roles of various different mandates and so on. So yeah, I'll just give a little bit of background about myself before I launch into the meat of my presentation. Or actually, it's not going to be a presentation, it's going to be a talk. Yeah, death by PowerPoint is not my way today. So yeah, I originally came into this space as a practitioner, was very enthusiastic about permaculture and agroecology in Joburg. That's where I'm from. And I now find myself as a scholar pursuing a PhD, trying to understand food governance in the two metros of Cape Town and Joburg. And I'm doing this with PLAS, the Institute for Poverty, Land and Agrarian Studies. But simultaneously, I work with the DSI NRF Center of Excellence in Food Security, the Food Policy and Governance unit, essentially. And so I'm going to be sharing a little bit about my some of the insights emerging from my PhD research, and also my experiences in working with the Food Imbizo, which is an initiative that we've been developing over the past 4 or 5 years. Initially, it was called a community of practice, but it has grown much further. So where Jaap's presentation was very much around the kind of legal frameworks and foundations of the governance, the multi-level governance of food in cities, I'm going to be talking about something slightly different, more from a sociological angle, informed by this notion of governmentalities, which is really trying to understand the kind of logics, the kind of thinking of how government operates. And my insights are as a person looking from the outside in. I haven't worked in government, so I'm sure that a lot of officials may have very different opinions here, but as an outsider, I also have the privilege of perhaps making some more incisive and critical comments. So please forgive me if I step on any toes. I think that's part of my role. I think one of the key issues in terms of understanding how the thinking within the state influences and limits this notion of multi-level governance is firstly around how food issues are even conceptualized by the state. And Jaap has already alluded to this, that generally food is understood to be an agricultural mandate. And consequently, the food security mandate is generally one that sits with provincial departments and national departments of agriculture. And this limits the possibility of really engaging at a systemic level. And this is something that was already pointed out earlier in the conversation, even in the introduction, around this notion of food systems and what that entails. And that really means that there is a need for a far more coordinated approach, not just within government, but throughout society in engaging with this issue. And as long as food security as a mandate is located primarily within an agricultural understanding, that in itself already limits the possibilities for a really broad approach. And hence in the cities, we still find that a lot of the initiatives default to urban agriculture as an approach. And I want to be quite clear that that cannot possibly resolve the scale and severity of food insecurity issues, nor can it deal with some of the issues involved with our rising cases of non-communicable diseases related to diet and food consumption. So we really need a different way of thinking about food, firstly. But then there are also several things around the way that the logics of government operate, in terms of there often being this notion of top-down governance and silos where essentially understandings from national level cascade down to province and then from province to local government. And even within government, we have a similar kind of situation. And that creates these strong vertical lines of accountability, which are problematic in their own right, but which make it really difficult for the kind of interdepartmental collaboration that is necessary to engage systemically with food, because it really requires greater cooperation and collaboration across all these various different departments and mandates that Jaap already indicated. But then also, even within local government, some of my research suggests that there's quite a split between the political level and the administrative level of local government. And we often find people that are kind of stuck in the middle, kind of senior level officials who really want to make a change, who often find very little willingness and interest from the political level to engage with food issues, but similarly are meeting a high degree of inertia from the kind of rank and file officials who are implementing programs that they've been familiar with and have often been running for decades. Well, maybe not decades, but a decade. And I think the city of Joburg is an example where we've got a current review of the food resilience strategy, which essentially is not much of a change from the food resilience strategy, which was initially developed in 2013. So there is really a need to shift these things, but I think people are very familiar and comfortable with doing things the way they have been doing. So again, we are defaulting to essentially handing out food cultivation support through wheelbarrows, spades, seeds, and the like, and setting up large kind of food production initiatives in tunnels outside of cities, which doesn't really help in addressing the real deeper systemic and social issues here. Then we often have this thing within local government and most government levels that we have departmental mandates that are quite strongly and clearly defined, and where people are challenged to work across with other departmental mandates because they don't really line up with their KPIs, their key performance indicators, and the various other instruments which are used within government to essentially make sure that officials follow the kind of mandates and the instructions that cascade down. There is another issue, though, in terms of how food security, again, is understood and conceptualized, which is around the food insecure being understood as beneficiaries and identified through various means of surveillance. So the state will, for example, have indigence registers, which be used to identify people in need of aid, and then essentially distributing resources to them, such as these agricultural starter packs that I've mentioned, or even of food parcels. And of course, there is a need for food parcels, especially in cases like with the COVID lockdown. But the distribution of resources like this bears risks. And one of those is really that they are abused as a way of essentially representing the state as taking an interest and making a difference, when perhaps there is no real willingness to engage with the more difficult aspects of food governance. Also there is an opportunity here for patronage, for graft. Firstly, in the way in which budgets allocated for these things and the tenders associated with them can be farmed out in ways that essentially reinforce the power and the privilege of elites within government, but also can be used for, especially in cases that we saw in Cape Town, where ward councillors were tasked with identifying beneficiaries of aid to essentially shore up the political power of people within local government. So I think we really need to be careful in how we think about engaging with this notion of food security and the distribution of resources, because it can create actual serious problems. So I've highlighted some of the problems so far, and I think it's important to speak about some of the possible pragmatic ways of engaging with these things. And one of the things that we've seen, which seems to have worked very well with the city of Cape Town, is a notion of stock taking. So what essentially happened is that within the city of Cape Town, a unit was tasked with mapping all the different institutions and mandates, but also of mapping the food system itself and developing an understanding of this. And in mapping the different institutions within the metro and understanding who holds these different mandates to engage with the food system, it enabled a far more effective coordination between these different institutions and allowed officials to begin building networks within the state. And I think this is an important approach to take, to build networks that cross these kind of siloed lines between departments, and to develop collaborative relations between officials who share an interest in these things. And of course, it's good to begin small, to work with people who have an interest, and then to gradually snowball and grow these networks so that one can actually begin developing a community of practice within the state of people that begin to understand food not as being about handouts or starter packs or simply about hunger, but that food issues really require this cross-departmental collaboration and then an understanding of each other and what the different mandates are. Another thing that we've learned, particularly again through the COVID crisis, is the importance of improving the way in which the state can engage bottom-up initiatives, particularly the activities of community action networks, the CANs, community-based organizations, soup kitchens and the like, faith-based organizations, but then also the larger NGOs, the civil society organizations that were involved in rolling out aid. And that would include, on the one hand, again, a stock taking of understanding who's actually doing what in that space, and possibly even mapping that geographically so that we can superimpose that with other kind of indices of deprivation and poverty. But it also means developing relationships and understanding what the different capacities and needs are within the community-based organizations and civil society. And then one of the things that Ryan alluded to already with regards to my work with the Food Imbizos is the value of having hybrid forums, such as the Food Imbizo, which bring together stakeholders from within government, different levels of government, so national, provincial, and local, but then also various different departments in government, but also academia, civil society, and generally anyone who has an interest. And ultimately, we all eat food, so we all are legitimately stakeholders in this. And one of the advantages of this approach, which takes a while, and like we've been incubating this for 5 years now, is that we gradually develop a shared language. We grow and cultivate knowledge around these issues together. And we ultimately build trust because we begin to understand what motivates each of the different stakeholders and role players within that space. And we begin developing the networks that allow us to understand issues, but also allow us to develop collaborative solutions when crises do arise. And again, the lockdown crisis was an example. And it was possible to mobilize a lot of knowledge quite quickly to inform responses within government. So I think this is one of the pragmatic approaches that can be very valuable in building greater food democracy and addressing the kinds of injustices and violence that the current configuration of the food system inflicts. I've already alluded to the role of the lockdown, and I think we really need to keep an eye on crises. Of course, we're all worried about crises in terms of how it may impact the resilience of the system, but that also creates a disruptive moment where suddenly food issues rise up on the agenda, and it opens up space actually to address issues because suddenly they become politically relevant. And in fact, one of the papers that I've just recently published looks at this, at how the lockdown crisis opened up space, which allowed important policy innovations to really take root within the city of Cape Town, obviously building on a decade or more of previous work. But the key take home here is that we develop knowledge, we develop policy proposals and ideas, knowing that future crises are on their way, whether it comes from climate change, extreme weather events, whether it comes from other new pandemics, whether it comes from political instability. We can be guaranteed that there are going to be further crises, and these will be opportunities actually to do things differently. And then this is something that I think has been mentioned before, but I'm going to repeat it because it bears repeating. We really need a clear mandate for local government from national to engage with food security issues. This should not just sit with province, and it should not just be an agricultural mandate, because as Jaap has already alluded, once there is a clear mandate, this also means that one can allocate budgets and human resources to an issue. And currently, this is a huge risk actually for people in local government to allocate significant resources towards something which they don't have a clear mandate for. And once this stumbling block is removed, it really opens up space to tackle these issues much more aggressively. And what we also need, though, fundamentally, is a shift in culture within government, away from an authoritarian top-down way of trying to enforce things, towards an approach, a culture of enablement and participation. And this really requires a rethinking of the way in which government works internally. And I think it also has to do with a generational shift. I have the sense that there are upcoming leaders who understand this kind of culture of collaborative work more closely and are willing to leave a little bit more play in the wheel, so to speak, to allow this kind of collaboration to happen and to create space for officials to use their initiative and to maneuver more freely and more creatively in figuring out collaborative solutions. But this also means that it's important to insulate decision makers and officials from interference, particularly from interference politically and from industry, because some of the issues that need to be engaged with are the harms that are inflicted by the big food industry, which generally sits within the cities. And this is one of the mandates which, Jaap, I'd be quite curious to hear your reflections on this, but we also have the constitutionally entrenched right to a safe environment. And the food environment's notion really creates an opening here in the sense that many of our food environments currently are not safe. If we look at supermarkets and malls, if we look at service stations, these are stocked with foods which we now know are really problematic. They cause health issues. Ultra-processed foods have been conclusively linked to some of our non-communicable diseases, obesity, hypertension, diabetes, and so on. And so there is in my mind, a very clear case that local government has a responsibility to ensure safe food environments. But as long as there's the risk of political interference, officials will be very, very loath and anxious to take on this kind of a large player, because obviously the food industry can mobilize millions, and there are probably also vested interests within the kind of political mechanisms and party funding mechanisms, which may make these kinds of interventions risky. And finally, my last point really is that food governance needs to be elevated to a higher coordinating function within local government in order for this kind of coordinating role to be possible and to enable representatives of such institutions to convene people from many different departments to collaborate more effectively. So those are some of the points that I felt like making. And I'm also going to very briefly copy some of the papers that I have recently authored or co-authored into the chat, so that those of you who are inclined towards reading academic articles can follow up on some of what I've done. You're also welcome to send me an email if you would like to engage with any of our activities of the Food Imbizo or have other queries that you'd like to follow up on. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Ryan, and I hope I haven't stepped on too many toes.
Thanks, Flo. I think, we're that got in government. I think it's maybe part of our job step on a couple of toes to spark some action, hopefully. But a lot in there, I think, very much relevant. Platforms like the Food Imbizo. I think what we're trying to achieve with these kind of platforms really has an opportunity to not just bring stakeholders together, but to sort of nurture and spark into action what we really need to ensure our food systems are a lot more integrated and sustainable. And it also, just a lot of what you said has made me reflect on the last 2 weeks, where we've had really important conversations with provincial government in Gauteng and KZN. Actually came back from KZN yesterday around these issues around governance, whether or not our current structure, business as usual, if that's going to get us to a more sustainable place, to a more resilient and inclusive food systems. Also, the issue around food safety was a massive discussion in KZN yesterday, particularly around what role the various levels of government, particularly local government, can play. So I hope to those that are in the room and that joined us yesterday, I see Balance is here from eThekwini, that sort of resonates with the discussions that we have had over the last couple of days. So thanks a lot, Flo, and I do encourage everyone to engage with Flo, engage with the resources that he did share, and to get in touch with him. Also a good friend of ours on this platform. We are going to shift focus slightly now to hear from some of our government departments. And first up, we'll hear from Mr. Tristan Gorgens, who's the Director for Food Policy and Strategy at the Western Cape Government, to talk a bit about their governance journey and touch a little bit on the Nourish to Flourish program. So, Tristan, can you hear me? The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I do have some slides, so if I can share those, just to try and bring them up. Can you see those okay? Okay, that's great. So hopefully this is almost a little extension / response to Flo's input. So it's us trying to really grapple with some of the things he's prescribing and trying to figure out what they look like in practice in the Western Cape. And it's really motivated by this very serious background problem that in every generation in the Western Cape, one in 5 children don't get a fair shot at life because they don't get sufficient food, the right food, in the first 2 years of their lives. And the picture was dire before COVID, and as we're hearing more and more this year, families remain in complete crisis, and there's a desperate need for us to respond quickly. But to get our response right, we have to start to grapple with all of the dynamics in the food system that are driving this dysfunction. And it really is overwhelming once you start to look at all the elements that go into a food system. And it's very easy to get lost in the noise and in the mandates. And exceptionally hard to think about how we would be able to coordinate just internally across the 3 spheres of government, let alone take seriously the idea that we actually have to work with social partners in the private sector and in civil society. But I think something we've kept front and center in our thinking is that while we know that hunger is an ongoing pressing issue that could be addressed through economic development and jobs and so on, giving people more money isn't actually going to fix the problem of malnutrition. And that's because there are a range of very important interactions between the food system, and I've already shown you how complicated that is, and other urban systems, other social systems that further deepen the patterns that are so problematic. And tackling the food system like it exists kind of in separation from these other systems in people's lives, it's likely to cause further problems, further complexity. And so all of this has been the kind of driving rationale behind the work we've been doing under the Nourish to Flourish banner in the Western Cape. And key to that has been creating a work group where we draw together all the provincial departments, all the districts, and the city, and then with great support from the Economic Development Partnership, which is a kind of parastatal support structure, who's been incredibly useful in helping us think through how we build partnerships and sustain them over time. And we've been trying to answer 3 sets of questions to try and keep things somewhat manageable, focusing on nutrition of young children, understanding the relationship between local food market systems and access, and really trying to figure out how we use data more effectively. And then again, in order to keep things manageable, we've been trying to focus on learning from 3 sites. One of the important things that I think we've become to really appreciate in more and more detail is that if you're going to drive systems change, you have to meet top-down processes with bottom-up processes. And really what you're looking for is top-down processes that are doing the job of enabling and reinforcing, where we are trying to recognize the amount of ingenuity and innovation that happens in people's lives, whether government's there or not. And we are often as much of a hindrance as a help in people's lives because we struggle to recognize those dynamics. And the thing that has been emerging from the work we've been doing recently that I thought would be useful to share here as we start to think about the practicalities of multi-level governance. The 3 big things I think that have come out have got to do with the issues of scale, questions around agency, and then thinking about capabilities far more carefully. And at the heart of the methodology that we've been using is the notion of learning journeys, which is really a very simple idea. And it's something we don't do enough in government, but it's really getting out there, engaging with people, treating them as the experts in their own lives, asking them to explain how they make choices, what influences them, what they would like to see differently, what kind of change, what kind of support would really help them. And it shakes the tree for officials so often when they come on these, because there's no room really to talk about mandates when you're in a space and you're talking to somebody who's trying to put one more meal on the table, trying to solve one more problem about getting their child to school and back safely. And so it brings the humanity of the officials into the space. It motivates them, but also challenges us all. And it allows us to understand how systems interact in space. And I think for a long time this is from Gareth Haysom's work, and I think for a long time there's been this implicit hierarchy in the way we understand the dimensions of food insecurity. And part of this initiative, I think, which is incredibly important, is to try and shift those conversations, those dynamics, away from top-down, very rural-focused, availability-focused discourses, to start to recognize that there are a range of interactions that have to happen at all of the scales for things to shift. And ultimately, as we've already heard, the local government has a critical role to play in all of this. Without local government, really the rest of us are fiddling at the edges on very important issues. And that's because so many of those driving systems have key powers that reside primarily or exclusively within the local government space. And we're learning that lesson over and over again with the narrative flourish work, is that to actually get to grips with how complicated things are when systems interact like this, you have to be having the conversation at a geographical space that makes sense to people. And I'd like to just quickly give you a sense of how ECDs are an interesting example of how many parts of the state we would need to bring with us to make a change. And this comes out of the recent ECD census that was just done by national government. So in the Western Cape, about a third of ECDs are registered, and just under a third are in the process of registering. So they're somewhat on the government's radar. But when you ask them how many of them receive money from government, only 1 in 5 receive money. So the state has got a very limited presence and influence in the ECD sector. And as a result, it's often reflected in the fees that have to be charged for young children to be in these spaces. But it's very unequal. But that said, ECDs play an incredibly important role in holding communities together, in the cohesion of communities. And we've heard over and over again in our learning journeys that ECDs find a way to keep kids in the program even if their parents can't pay. And almost all children will receive 2 to 3 meals a day at the ECD. And most of that food is prepared in the ECD. Only about half of ECDs have taps inside their structures or near, and almost a quarter of ECDs need buckets or bowls to wash their hands. And so when we take a step back, the sector challenges us because it is so mobilized. It's got such amazing human beings holding things together, getting things going in it. But it cuts across every part of our communities, from formal spaces to informal shacks, from small little hole-in-the-wall things to big numbers of children. They provide all of that feeding. A huge amount of that money comes from the fees, comes from the ECD center. Some of it comes from government. Most of it's prepared there under varying conditions, as we've heard. This is a picture from one of the ECDs, and behind the people standing there are the buckets that the young children have to go and do their ablutions in. And all of this actually is about economic activity as much as it is about food access. And it's only by thinking about it with all of that complexity that we start to understand the opportunity that ECDs offer us. And so when we wrestle with the opportunity that the DDM model is presenting us with, I think it's very important for us to take it seriously, because it is a genuine attempt to organize and mobilize local government to be part of this conversation. But I think it's very important that we don't fall into the trap of thinking that by getting it on the DDM agenda, we're going to change anything. What we need to build enough space in the DDM conversation so that it can start to drive a response from local government and from these smaller spaces, so that they reach out to understand the agency of people. And so the 2 new things that have been added to the definition that I think we are only now taking more seriously, the notions of agency and all of the issues that go into the utilization of food, so that people really do feed themselves. And so something else that's come out very strongly from the work we've done is that you need a human-centered and a human-sized process to be able to get people into the room together to have conversations. And as I've already said, for people to be the experts in their own lives and to communicate what they need, and to begin to build joint understanding that's based on what's already happening, where the energy already is, that's responsive. And this is as important for the way in which it builds a sense of community, a sense of solidarity, a sense of joint action, as it is about actually generating the initiatives that will change the underlying system. And so how we do things is as important as what we do, we've found. But the last challenge I want to say that we're wrestling with is that it means that we have to operate in a totally different way in government to the way we are expected to work and the way in which we normally work. And on the one hand, that is about releasing ourselves from our control and command and control mindset, but it's also starting to figure out how to allow our systems to enable a different way of doing things. So I'm leaning very heavily on a model that's kind of developed to try and describe how we deal with wicked problems and complex systems, and it's the 5R governance capabilities. The first is reflexivity. It's really trying to understand how we understand the system, and to get that shaken up. And that's part of that about getting us out of our silos, getting us out of our usual ways of understanding things. But as you can see, that's very challenging for a system like government, because what it requires is for us to live in the ambiguity, for us to be able to change problem definitions as we go. And that's very difficult for government to do well. The next is about resilience thinking, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And that's really about flexibility, learning by doing. And again, it requires a system that allows us to iterate and dial in on the kinds of solutions that might work. Responsiveness is key to this, obviously, which is really engaging with people, engaging with systems, and developing a sense of what works and what helps change to emerge. But that requires a nuance that's very hard to sustain, I think, in structures where there's a lot of pressure and there's a lot of hierarchy. Ultimately, change only comes from spaces of hope and trust. And so your processes also need to have these revitalizing aspects to them. And you need people who understand how to keep hope alive, how to keep a conversation going and productive, even under conditions of real stress. And again, we need institutional spaces, processes that allow us to do that. And finally, as I've already spoken about, I think thinking about scale in very dynamic ways and working across scale is a hidden talent that we really need to foster in government. That we get very stuck at different layers of a problem, and we really struggle to understand how things are interacting across space and time. And so again, this is a real challenge for us in our planning processes, in our data processes, in our decision-making processes. But unless we get real about it, I don't think we're going to be able to take this multi-level decision-making planning system seriously. And so we try to process all of this stuff that's coming up for us as we learn, and we're starting to try and build it into what we're calling a governance model, but it's really a way to try and capture all the learning that's coming out of these processes so that we can start to have a joint knowledge repository, but also that we can start building multiple teams that are having similar experiences, that it becomes a shared set of capabilities across government in the Western Cape government, but also in the local governments that we're working with. So that's where we are in the process, and we're about halfway. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks so much, Tristan. And as you conclude, there's a comment of Shus. I think it's been really well received from our side too. I think there was a lot in there, particularly around the DDM and like-minded tools to respond rather than create change. I think that's an important note for us also to take as we embark on this journey, as I mentioned, alluded to earlier, around this opportunity to craft these strategic recommendations for government. And I think yeah, sort of last few slides around the 5 R's also hit home. As I alluded to earlier, we've had interesting discussions in Gauteng and KZN over the last 2 weeks, and the conversation ranged from our sort of business as usual approach, in terms of sort of commercial agriculture versus more sustainable practices, from people's being demoralized on the ground in terms of being able to drive that change, and that revitalizing R has just sort of hit home to me because it's a discussion that we had in KZN yesterday, actually, in actual fact, which was quite interesting. So it just shows again the complexity of this challenge, I think, that we're trying to solve and engage on. But yeah, again, a big thank you for setting the scene for that. And speaking about the East Coast, we're going to head back there to Ms. Balance Pala from eThekwini Municipality to talk a little bit about eThekwini's food systems governance approach and talking a little bit also about crafting relationship with other spheres of government. So, Balance, if you can hear me, please do indulge us.
Yes, I can, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm just going to check on Vuyo because we actually have a joint presentation. I'll be presenting on how we are assisting the startups, and he will present on the commercial aspect of our food systems. So he's in another meeting and he just asked me to let him know when it's our turn. So can I just have 2 minutes so I can notify him? I apologize.
Excuse me, Chair, through you. I'm in the meeting, Balance. Now you can continue. Okay.
Thanks.
So I'll be speaking about the agroecology unit, which is housed within the eThekwini municipality. So our key strategic focus as the agroecology unit is actually to alleviate poverty and food insecurity. So we are currently assisting 500 communal gardens, and we have household gardens, institutional gardens, and we are collaborating with various entities. So our primary target for support are those that are vulnerable and where limited resources can be used to impact them. So a form of support is permaculture training. So we actually encourage permaculture farming or agroecological type of farming, which is very good for environmental sustainability. And through these programs, the city provides support in the form of training on permaculture practices, healthy diet, food safety, environmental health, soil management, water preservation, and nature-based pest management. And we do this in collaboration with various institutions, including the University of KwaZulu-Natal, chefs, and Southern African Food Lab. And we are assisting the aquaculture projects as well, and we currently have 10, and our form of assistance to the aquaculture projects is in the form of fish fingerlings training, and we commission extensive sorry. So yes, we assist our farmers through a low-tech earthen pond that is easily manageable. and that they can run on their own. So we do this so that they can grow the fish further into market size for consumption or for selling. And market has been a real challenge. So with regard to collaboration with other entities, we have the Wozanami project, which is within the Southern African Food Lab. And our focus has been on the west region of eThekwini, which is in Changa. And we've seen an impactful, it's been very impactful towards our farmers in a sense that they learned how to farm through the agroecological principles and climate smart agriculture. And we'll be having a learning journey on the 11th of October, just to identify the gaps that have been there throughout, that have been identified throughout the course of our project, the course of the project with the Wozanami. But we've been seeing a very impactful thing that has been happening. And so with our farmers, because market is an issue, we sort of have like obviously a relationship with our sister department, which is the agribusiness, and Vuyo will focus more on that. Once we see that they're able to function on their own financial basis, or they're self-reliant, we hand them over to Vuyo, who to the agribusiness department that connects them to market. So we've also been assisting our farmers in terms of the food safety trainings, but due to lack of resources such as funds, we've only been able to assist like limited farmers. So without any further ado, I just want to hand over to Vuyo, and if there's anything that I've left behind, you'll just notify me. Over to you, Mr. J.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Balance. Good morning to everyone in the meeting. Also, just to extend our apologies, I think it's no form of any disrespect that we did not prepare PowerPoint presentation, but at times we just felt that it robs us of engaging on the real issues which we wanted to bring in the discussion, because at best we could just tell you what are the services that the municipality provides within the agricultural space, and it might not be the best contribution we can give into this platform. So just to go from where Balance left off, the agribusiness department within the municipality is sitting under a unit called Business Supports, Markets, Tourism and Agribusiness. And our mandate is enterprise development. So food security is not our primary mandate in terms of our function as agribusiness. But I think it brings us, okay. Thanks. My apologies, I was just reading. So it brings us to some of the issues I think that we've seen. Our department is only 3 years old within the municipality. We have an agri-business master plan within the city of eThekwini. It's available from our website. And that master plan assists us it guides us at how best do we support small enterprises within the primary production and the agro-processing within the city. And we looked at the commodities which can be best grown within the municipality. So it's no different from what conventional agriculture is doing, and us trying to improve efficiencies of smallholder farmers so that they can also supply a higher value into the markets. But I think when you look at the food systems, we are playing at a very minute space. And I think engagements that we've had with agroecology, which is led by Balance, and also from interacting with other international platforms like the Food Cities and the C40, we're seeing a big gap as to how we are intervening into the space. Because when it comes to food systems, and I think if you're listening to a trend from all the previous speakers, is that there's an issue of poverty, because poverty leads people not to be able to access nutritious food, because where we are, nutritious food seems to be very costly. And I think the stunt growth and the exposure to a lot of communicable diseases are issues that are there. And I think we're finding ourselves as the city having to look back and see how best can we service this space, because enterprise development is just but one aspect, but all we are interested in there is job creation and growing our share of production within the country. but I think it does not directly address access to food, because I think at eThekwini, more than 30% of our citizens are declared as poor because they can't afford a meal a day is not guaranteed with them. And I think our programs do not address those citizens which we have within the city. And I think what we are looking at is that there are players which need to be part of this discussion. One important player is the Department of Health, because they could be preparing informational material that helps to educate citizenry the importance of nutrition and its correlation with health. And I think the second stakeholder, which we feel is not, even if they are there, I might not know, but I think it's a voice that certainly as eThekwini we haven't interacted with, is the corporate South Africa, the biggest producers and distributors of food. And I think that's where the issue of pricing and costing is a real issue. And I think all those things, there are things which are sort of outside the local government mandate. And I think the previous speaker did speak about the mandates of local governments. But where we are finding ourselves is that we need to project ourselves as a conduit that works with the national government, which has the mandate, Department of Health, so that we can promote more nutrition to the citizens of where we have our municipalities, work with corporate South Africa for availability of nutritious food at affordable pricing, because affordability is the main issue with low-income communities. If you look at our informal settlements, where bulk of our citizens in eThekwini do reside, there's a very desperate issue when it comes to nutrition. And I think that's where we're starting to find ourselves that, okay, we do have these departments, we have the current mandates that these departments have, but participating in forums like this are starting to open our eyes that maybe we need to take a little bit of step back. We understand the constitutional mandate which we have to intervene in local economic development, but there's more a socio-economic challenge that the food system is trying to address, and is trying to address predominantly the most vulnerable in our societies. And I think one of the good things about the local government legislation is that it does empowers us a lot to intervene on any issues that are affecting vulnerable members of our societies. And I think with ourselves in eThekwini, I think there's just a restructuring which we need to do amongst ourselves, whereby we can collaborate closer with the city health department, because also they do have food food programs within their unit where they deal with food security, because also that's what they have seen, is that when it comes to clinics which are closer to low-income communities, the biggest problem is malnutrition, especially to young children. So I think that's the contribution, Chair, that we wanted to bring, that we might be in the space, we might have programs that work with farmers in terms of improving efficiencies of production, access to markets. We do have those programs. But I think in the bigger scheme of what we are trying to do, I think the impact will be very small in terms of providing visible change into the food system within the municipality. To a point, I think we are at our initial stages where we are still trying to gather terms of reference so that we can develop a food policy for the municipality, because we don't have such, so that we can better understand our own food system. And then, as an outcome of that, hopefully we can then improve how the city then intervenes within the food system. But currently, I think we are going through the motions. We do provide a lot of support to the production side of food. But what we have seen is that over the past 3 years, we haven't seen much impact in terms of the pricing and the cost to the end consumer. And I think that's where the big impact needs to happen. That will need some policy guidance, but it also requires a lot of integration with the players within the space. Like I said, corporate South Africa, because they are the biggest distributors of food into all facets of our societies, whether to informal traders, to supermarkets and other distribution points which are available in our society, and also the Department of Health, which we really need to collaborate very closely, especially when we develop such a policy. So, Chair, I would like to stop there, and forgive me for not sticking too much on telling you what we do for farmers within the space, because I just felt that it won't bring the kind of value that I think this discussion requires from us as eThekwini. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, William. Thanks, Balance. And I think no problem. I think still good insights made. I think, as you mentioned, it's obviously when we talk about food systems and municipalities at all, I think it's a beast in itself. I think it's encouraging to hear that even though I think the food systems work in the city that you guys are doing is just sort of 3 years old, so it's still very much in its infancy stage. There's already a lot that the municipality is doing, and also sort of looking into how they can improve and enhance that. And very promising also to hear that the city is embarking on developing a dedicated strategy and policy. And I think we look pretty much forward to seeing that come to fruition, and of course support and collaborate and input where we can. So thank you for joining us. It's crazy to think that we engaged in person yesterday, and then now today we're meeting virtually again, but we really do appreciate the input from eThekwini, and hopefully you guys find this platform useful as well. Going to shift slightly inland and hear from our colleagues from the city of Johannesburg, and we're going to hear from Chidi Maponya. Chidi, if you can hear me, Chidi is the acting sub-unit head for urban agriculture under the food resilience unit at the city of Joburg, and also going to share with us the city's governance journey and what the interventions are in that regard. So Chidi, you are with us.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. So let me try to share the document that I'm gonna present. And then we also learned a lot today. I don't know whether is it on or what? Can you see my screen?
That's busy loading, Chidi. I think, there we go. So if you can put it in presentation mode, we can see your slides. You're good to go.
Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yes, Chidi, you may proceed.
Okay. I'll be talking about the food security, urban agriculture, and the agro-processing in the city of Joburg. And then in our city of Joburg, we are falling under the Social Development Department. And then there is a unit called Food Resilience Unit. The Food Resilience Unit is focusing on the food security programs. And then I think the research has been done, which was indicating that about 42% of our population within the city of Joburg go to bed hungry. So, and then we had to come up with something that can be able to assist our community within the city of Joburg. Remember, each and every person, when you grow up from the rural areas or from the Ekasi, you just think about the city of gold, thinking that when you come to city of Joburg, you're just gonna get a gold all over the city. So that's why we wanted to come up with this, and then so that we can be able to assist our community. So the presentation outline will be based on the background and the content of Food Resilience Unit, Food Resilience, our mandate, and then our operational structure, and then which we have a leg of urban agriculture. And then under urban agriculture, we focus on the food bank, food gardens, empowerment zones, agri-resource, access to tractor services, which is part of the mechanization, and the business development services. And then the other part is the agro-processing and value adding. And then we also have a mandate to have the partnership part. And then I'll also talk about the challenges that we are facing in the city. So I'm not gonna read through this background, but I'm just gonna outline some of the things that we you can see here on the screen. So this is about the part of the food security and the nutrition that we are trying to promote through the agricultural part that we are having. Remember, the part of the agriculture is the mandate of the provincial. So we are focusing on the food security, but it is important for us to have this part of agriculture within the municipality. And then basing on the national development plan that we have and the Gauteng provincial government anti-poverty strategies. And then in the city, we do have the City of Joburg Growth and Development Strategy, which is about to improve the quality of life and the development driven for the resilience for all. So remember, our executive mayor is part of the C40. She is the deputy chairperson in the C40. And the City of Joburg has managed to participate in the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact, and then which brings together more than 200 cities coming together, and then to look at how can the part of the food resilience can be sustainable, and then focusing on the part of the climate change, and so on and so on. So our mandate is to improve the food security and the livelihood of the poor in the community, and then to ensure that people are generating income, and then they are producing to reduce hunger, and then also to contribute significantly towards the regional GDP and stimulate local economic growth. So like I've mentioned, that we are having the part of the two sections, that is the urban agriculture and the agro-processing. So on the urban agriculture, that is the food bank, food garden, agri-resource, I think I've mentioned them when I started in the beginning. So I'll just jump this slide. So let me start with this, the subunit urban agriculture. So in this urban agriculture, that's where we are linked with the Joburg market. So the Joburg market assists us in the part of the buying and the packaging. So the social development department, which is our food resilience unit, we are focusing on the logistic part, the quality assurance, and the part of the distribution. So we have a team which goes out to identify the poor household, and then we screen them. And then if there is a situation where we need social worker to make an assessment, and then we do call them to do the assessment. And then we are distributing only vegetable packs, which is a pack of a cabbage, potatoes, butternut, onion, carrots, and so on. So it's a 12 kg of vegetable pack that we are giving to the poorest of the poor. And then with the encouragement of saying, you need to have your own backyard garden so that you can be able to produce the veggies and then for yourself. And then we have the backyard garden, and then some of the community, they started to come together and they create the so-called communal gardens. And then we also have the part of the rooftop garden. In terms of the communal garden, that's where more than one person can be able to form a group and start farming there. And then with the intention of registering the communal garden to become a cooperative and be able to sell at the market. And then in terms of the rooftop gardens, our intention was to target the municipal facilities, as you can see on the roof of the Constitutional Hill and the others. And then that's where we are doing the so-called hydroponic farming system with the intention of saving water. And then we also have some greenhouse gardens. And then the greenhouse gardens is in region B. That's where we are also doing this hydroponic system to save water, and then within municipal facilities. And then we also have the so-called aquaponics. And then that's where we are linking both fishes and vegetables as a solid produce to the community, and then we are able to sell to the local communities and the market. And then we also have the so-called food empowerment zones. The food empowerment zones, that's where we are having a large land, and then we incubate different cooperatives, and then so that they can be able to farm, but for their own cooperative. So currently we are having the Ekenhof garden, the Ekenhof farm, which has about 270 hectares, and then Vierhof 4 hectares, and Nicefield 5 hectares, and then the Northern Farm has about 38 hectares. That's where we are able to run the part of the livestock, which is poultry and piggery, and even the agri-park. Like for example, in the Ekenhof, we have more than 40 tunnels, and then we are currently doing the extra 20 tunnels, which is going to be about 60 tunnels for, and then cooperatives are farming there. And then we are also having youth groups that are also farming there. So these are some of the pictures that you can see that our farmers are able to produce at the empowerment zones. So, and then we have the part of the that we called agri-resource centers. The agri-resource centers is the centers where people are allowed to come in and then they ask for our services. That's where we coordinate the part of the tractors. We have tractors within the city, and then we are assisting the farmers with the tractor for free at the meantime. And then we are able to give them the land for a period of 5 years so that they can be able to be equipped, and then after that they can be able to go and buy their own farms through the empowerment zones. So these are the facility where the tractors, we place the tractors, and then the other part, as you can see, is part of the agri-resource centers where we are training the people how to start their own gardens. And then we also have a part of the nurseries, and then we are giving these seedlings for free, because sometimes when you give people seeds, they are not willing to start their gardens. So we prefer to have this kind of seedlings, and then those who don't have a particular space, a good space to use, we give them these plastic seedlings so that they can be able to start nurturing their own garden. And then these are part of the mechanization that we have as part of the supporting program that we are able to assist the community around. So we also have the part of the learning program. In the learning program, that's where we are helping the farmers. We are giving them skills, and then we are linking with AgriCita, universities, like yeah. So they are assisting us in training our farmers so that they can be able to be equipped and then to do the right thing at their own gardens. So we train them through technical skills, business skills, and then we also give them information that they can be able to market themselves or to work. And then this is just part of the people that they have led through our information disseminations. So they are graduates, and then United Ways was able to assist us in terms of those kind of training. So we were celebrating the graduation ceremony. So these are part of our partners that we are currently having. And then, like I said, United Ways is one of our partners, Old Mutual. They also fund us, Bidverse Catering Services. Some of our projects are able to provide their produce to the catering companies, like Space, like Fruit and Veg, and so on. And then we have the Discam Wakanda. Some are funding us, and then some are funding us through technical skills that we having. And then, so this is all still continuing as part of the partnerships that have been formalized. And then you can even see the pictures where we are signing the MOU with them. That is the sort of the agreement in which we are saying you will do this and then we will be doing that. And then this is the part of the organic farming. So in terms of the organic farming, so that's where UNEP has came in, and then they have funded our program, and then we are able to do the eco district, the social housing, food resilience, organic farming, the biogas production, and then evidence-based on the planning policies and so on. So, but in terms of the biogas, we are still in that process. We didn't reach that part yet, but organic farming is already existing. So we have about 15 projects that are organic, and then we are still improving. And then when we do the policy review, that's where we had to bring in the part of the organic farming, because in the first policy that we have, it was not there. So these are some of the projects that are organic. And then this one is based at the Rankisfontein in Midrand. And then the other one is based in next to Four Ways in the city of Joburg. So we also have that part of the agro-processing. And then in the agro-processing, and then we are having, we have built it, I can't say it's a building, but we have a container where we have launched it as an abattoir. So we are slaughtering chickens and selling there. And then we have projects such as juice making, acha, and so on. And then we do have the so-called market days. So each region conduct the market days in the region. It depends whether we'll be going to a mall where we can be able to take fewer farmers and they go that side and sell their produce there, so that they can be able to make income. And then this is also part of the products that we are able to do here in the city of Joburg. I'm not gonna elaborate much on that. And then we have the so-called the hubs. So this is the hub that we have built it so that the people that are doing the packaging and the cooking, they are able to utilize these facilities. Our standard is still growing up because we still need to have proper certifications so that we can be able to handle food in a proper way. But right now it's just about the packaging and including the Joburg market where we are doing the packaging of the food distribution. So we have some challenges. So for example, like I said, there are many people that are coming from the rural areas to the city, and then they don't have a place to stay. They invade our land. So they invade some of the gardens. And then we also have a lack of land to expand, because within the city of Joburg, there are a lot of buildings and so on. So we still need a bigger land where we can be able to expand so that people can be able to have their own food. They can be able to have their own garden. So we still have a lack in attracting the youth and the PWD into this program. So we do have them, but they only come when we have the part of the stipend, where we are training them with the stipend, and then after that, only few will be able to register as cooperatives, not all of them. And then we still have the constrained resources to adopt to new methods of production, because every time the food system, oh my goodness, I've moved, sorry. Every time there is a new method of production and so on. So we still need to learn, and then we have to have resources. We need those resources so that we can be able to produce. And then the other part is the market competition. Remember, we are having smallhold organization, cooperatives or farmers. So when it comes to the marketing part, it's very difficult for them to cope with the bigger market. For example, in terms of food distribution, our intention is to buy from our farmers so that we can be able to distribute to the very poor people. So when we distribute to the poor, there is a band that we use, and through the ESP, through the expanded social package. So in terms of the marketing, there are people coming from Eastern Cape and so on, so they come in and then they will be able to compete with our smaller farm, bringing beautiful cabbages, bringing beautiful butternut and so on. We end up buying from there. So that, but we don't circulate the money within the city of Joburg. So we need to focus on how do we circulate the money within the city of Johannesburg so that our farmers can be able to generate the income and then live a healthy lifestyle. And then to avoid a lot of people to be in clinics because of their chronic diseases, and then they don't have money to buy food. And then the other thing is the packaging and the storage, and the storage. So we don't have enough storage. Not all the regions have the hubs. And then there is a lack of resources for agro-processing, and then we are not yet at commercializing, but we do have market outside. And then the infrastructure development. So we still need some fencing, some boreholes and other things. And then we also need to have a mechanism of harvesting water during rainy season without having risk. And then the other one is to increase the number of tractors to cover the whole city, because our tractors are not enough. Our region, the city is divided into 7 regions. And then we still need to build a network with a food security system. So these are also part of the partnerships that we have. So I think I've already mentioned about the partnerships that we have. We are also working with the Provincial Department of Agriculture, the Rural Development and Land Reforms in terms of the poultry sections, and then the INMED, the IMNET. So they are helping us, they are providing structures, they provided structure in Soweto and in Diepsloot. And then United Ways, I've already mentioned about it. And then we also have ARC, and then even the Department of Agriculture Provincial, they are also assisting us. And then the University of Vet and UJ, including UNISA, they are also on board. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chidi. If I am looking a bit flustered, we just got disconnected by load shedding. So we thought we might lose this session and lose you guys, but great that this session could continue. And yeah, Chidi, thank you for that, for just bringing us onto the journey of COJ. I think a lot going on in the city. We visited the City Deep Market last week, and it was really interesting to see operationally what's going on there, and also just hearing about the challenges, but also the future very ambitious plans that the city has to upgrade the market infrastructure and bring in some more sort of sustainable practices around the precinct. So I think, as you mentioned, a lot happening in the city, a lot of challenges, experiences, but also, as you ended off on a sort of more positive note around partnership and the various organizations and institutions taking the city's hand on this journey. So again, thank you for sharing. Just as we move on, I just want to check if we have anyone from COCTA on the line joining us for an intervention. Anyone from the National Department of Cooperative Governance, Traditional Affairs? The National House of Traditional and Khoisan Leaders.
Take the silence as a no. No one from Cocta? It's a shame we did invite Cocta into the session, which I think is an important role player, of course, when we're talking governance. And I think, yeah, perhaps at the later stage, if we do have a dialogue version 3, I think we would definitely push to have them as part of the discussion. But yeah, it's a shame that Cocta was unable to join us today. I think with that, then we'll move on to our final speaker, who represents the South African Local Government Association, Zanapolo Futwa. If you are with us, please do engage with us. Zanapolo is still on the call. I think load shedding is affecting a couple of us today, and that's might be the reason why we've lost a couple of people. I think maybe with that, as I alluded to in the beginning, we did want to give the national department, Darald, an opportunity to engage, and maybe this is an opportunity for national department. If we have Darald on the call, I think there was representation earlier. This is an opportunity for national department to maybe just give a brief reflection on the session and perhaps more importantly on the theme of today. So if there is anyone from Darald on the call, you are welcome to unmute and share. Not to put anyone on the spot, even if it's just a brief reflection. I think that will be most welcome from national government. No one from Darald? No one from Cocta? No one from Southern?
Good afternoon, I'm here.
Good afternoon, sir.
This is Itumeleng Makabanyane, Director of Africa Trade Promotions in the department.
Great.
And also a focal person for the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program. I am happy that I joined this meeting. I don't know whether it was by chance or something, but whatever it is, it was a good thing I joined. I got an invitation and joined. What I realize here is I've seen the practical ways of how people and different groupings are trying to assist in putting food on the tables of many South Africans. And that is to be commended. What we need, what I have not seen yet, maybe it is with the other speakers who are not here yet, is how do we coordinate all these endeavors? How do we harness our efforts towards a common goal? For example, I hear of bits and pieces of what government and non-state actors are doing, for example, in the Western Cape, in the KZN. That is all good, but there would be somebody again next to you there who's doing a similar thing in a district next door. So in order to realize the impact of our interventions, whether you are in government or you are a non-state actor, it may very well be that it is good if I know that while I'm in District A, in District B, I know that they are doing this. In other words, sharing our efforts across South Africa so that we have a better picture of what is happening on the ground. You may think that you are because you are in a particular, in the Johannesburg Metro, and what you are doing in the Johannesburg Metro, it's small and insignificant. But if you add that to what is happening in Tshwane Metro, in the Cape Town Metro, and in many other district municipalities, you'd realize that there is actually a lot that we are doing as South Africans towards a common good. So it is that coordination that I like. And for that reason, I would want to request that I get what is it, the mailing list of all the people who took part in this event, in this session, so that we can I can go back to them and say this is what my opinion is on how we think we can pool our interventions together, so that we know more or less fully what is happening around the country, so that I don't only know what is happening in Fourways, but I also know what is happening in Hartebees Dam. I also know what is happening somewhere in Port St. John's or something, and that gives a picture of the country, of the efforts of the South Africans, not only government in the country. And with that, I will leave that with Rian, that we get the mailing list and we keep the dialogue going, we keep the discussion going, and we share our experiences and information, and perhaps even pool our resources together to increase our impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Ntumuleng, and thank you for that intervention. And I think certainly we would, we're more than willing. I'm happy to engage with National Department on this. I think it's an important collaboration to have, and I'm glad that we have the National Department as part of this discussion to not only learn but input as well. I see we also have colleagues from the Department of Social Development. I gather that is what DSD means. Also very promising. They also joined us in Gauteng last week and made very good inputs into the discussions around food system and their potential role. So I'm happy for that intervention, sir. And you have our commitment that we will make sure that we take the conversation forward. So thank you again for that. Maybe before we move on, just another call if we have Salga or Kokta on the line. Yeah, I think we're still looking good for time. Maybe before I give Ivan an opportunity just to share some reflections, I want to open it up to the floor. I know there's been a lot of discussions in the chat, but if there's maybe someone with a burning question or comment, one of the speakers maybe who felt that they wanted to mention another thing or two, please do share. If you do have a comment or a question to make, you're welcome to raise your hand, and I will call on you to make an intervention. I think the discussion and the inputs have been rich. We still have majority of our speakers and panelists on the line, so this is an opportunity to perhaps engage. So if you do have a burning question or comment to make, I'm happy for you to raise your hand and I can give you the opportunity to do so. No comments? Don't see any hands. You're also welcome to unmute yourself and to share anything that stood out for you particularly.
Hi, can I come in?
You're welcome, ma'am.
I'm trying. I've been in and out of this because of the load shedding and so on. So tomorrow, the City of Joburg is hosting an event. We are doing the so-called agro-processing event, where we call in all the different agro-processors from different regions. They come together to the City of Johannesburg and they display their produce so that we can be able to market them in future and so on. So it was gonna start at about 8 o'clock until 3 o'clock tomorrow. So it's a bigger event. And then besides that, we are having the so-called terms of references. And then in terms of when we allocate land to the farmers, we sit down with the national and the provincial government, and then we are able to select farmers who can be able to occupy the farm for a period of 5 years. And then from there, you have to go on commercial farm. And then we also have the so-called agri-forums in each and every region, where all the different farmers are coming together, and then they share their experiences, they share their frustrations and so on, so that, and then we can see how can we help them and how can we link them. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Chidi. Just on the event tomorrow, will that be a virtual event? And if so, we would welcome you to share the details to that. And I'm sure, when participants, if they're available, they'll be keen to join.
Unfortunately, it's not going to be a visual event. It's a physical event. That's where people will be coming in, okay, and then so that they can be able to see what we are producing and so on.
Great. So a call to those of the participants in Johannesburg. I think that's an invitation to join the COJ team tomorrow for that event. So please do get in touch with Chidi. If you do need, Chidi, if you want to leave your details in the chat, I think, participants might get in touch with you. So thank you for sharing that as well. I see there's two hands. Sean Keynes from Seed to Harvest. Want to share?
Yes, thanks, Ryan. Great. It's an amazing, platform, that was hosted this morning. I'd like to just commend, I don't know, Maponyana, I don't know the first name, M. I'm not even going to attempt to say her name, but
don't even mention that. Just say TD Maponya.
Okay.
That name I've been given by Home Affairs. That is not my real name.
Okay. Okay, Phoebe, I would like to commend you on the amazing work you guys are doing for small farmers, and I think with the program, which is much needed within our small scale farming sector, because as small scale farmers and me being used to being a small scale farmer, myself now sort of incubating farmers and community farmers, I think it's so needed within the space, and this type of program that you guys are doing, I think it needs to be mimicked across South Africa provincially, and that is the challenge. Normally you find that one province excels and does an amazing work, like a resource center, the empowerment centers. I mean, the agri-resource center, when I started farming, the greatest challenge I had was one, I had access to no seedlings, no tractor, etc. And it becomes a laborious task. But when you can empower and motivate farmers, I think then you're going to change the landscape and the dynamic, and you will change actually the whole way farming is done. So I think well done to that, and what you guys are doing. I would love to collaborate with you, Phoebe, and to have a conversation around, to look at, how we can even be of assistance to you with what we are doing, and also find out more about your empowerment centers as well. Thanks.
Great. Thanks a lot, Sean. And we're happy to put you in touch with Chidi at COJ. And thank you for joining us. I don't think we've met before, so I think you're a new face and a new friend on our platform, but welcome. We look forward to engaging with you further. And like I said, great to make that connection with COJ.
Yes, thanks, Anne. I mean, for those who don't know me, we have been working across the country. I just work in the background, but I mean, our organization Seed to Harvest, we mainly incubate small scale farmers. We look at develop, just a quick story. As a farmer, I realize, and one of our main focus areas is household food security, because realizing that you're giving people, implements, you're giving them inputs and those things, but you don't realize that there is the challenge of insects, pests, disease, And when you're giving someone who's never grown anything to try to alleviate food insecurity, I think we kind of do more injustice by just giving people seeds and compost. But there's a greater challenge around nature, around climate, all of these type of things. So what we've done as Seed to Harvest, we've developed, and it's in the chat, I've shared our poster. We've created a concept where people says, you know, I've taken my model, my small scale farming model, and brought it down into a little box and says, this is how you can farm with a 12-week crop protection program, feeding program. So you take the person from seed to harvest, mitigating all the challenges, all the pests and diseases that's going to come. I'm telling you, because you're growing a buffet for the snail. You lovely thing. So how do you boost the grower confidence, you know, going forward, so that you ensure that the next growing season, the household farmer, the small scale farmer is confident enough to continue growing. And that is why many projects fail, because confidence drops within the first growing season, because these individuals that don't have the confidence, or they lack the support, you know, going forward. So I would love to collaborate, Ryan, and let's keep chatting and with the rest of the network. But thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely, Sean. Thank you for sharing. We'll be in touch. Fusumzi?
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here. I had to leave another very important departmental meeting just to join this meeting, because to us, matters of food security, they are at heart, because we have seen the challenges of food insecurity, especially at household level. The speakers have highlighted a number of issues that I think they are critical, starting with the first one, who presented around the issue of the role of municipality. I'm happy that this has been made very clear. Now that there is a clear role within their ambit of sphere, those things that are at their level to use, he called them levers. But I think there is a debate around, some of them would use the issues of budget, non-mandated activity on all of that. So I think maybe another debate, maybe when we engage, it's a pity that we couldn't have Salga here, and probably local government. We needed them to be here, but we hope in the future we can have them. But also the issues that I think the picture that Tristan painted, you cannot forget that picture, challenges, especially at that age of your life, 5 years or more, or lesser in terms of years, standing and malnutrition, you cannot forget that picture. But I think for me, one question I have now, in these kind of dialogues, to what extent can we engage business? Because there is a very link of what is happening with what, remember now, food has been made a commodity, a product, something that people must have. Is a business opportunity. The whole system, from production, processing, cleaning, packaging, distribution, the whole system, until to the wholesale retailers, and you find the food in the shelf in the supermarket. There is some playing happening there. And then the researchers say food security is a function of what is happening on the food system. I see Prof. Scott Dreamy would agree to that, and a lot of academics, if we were to put that in a statistical formula. Now, they say if there is a good play on the food system, there will be a good food security. But if there was a bad playing by all the players, from production until to the consumption level, there's some bad playing. How do we intervene strategically on the food system? To what extent, as this platform, do we have a leverage to engage business? Because it's up for everyone, from processing, transport, packaging, all of those things. Everyone must make something or earn money. As a result, we end up with high food prices on the shelf. Hence, the people who are championing food sovereignty will talk about localization and all of that, so that you cut the whole middleman and all of that. So to me, these dialogues are very important, but to what extent do we engage that part of the society, the business? Because I want to hear what is they going to do to really come to the party on this, because they have a big role in terms of all of these things happening there. And now is the time that they come out. And I would also pick up on issues with city there around the food banks and so on, agro-processing. They've got some very interesting opportunities there, but I've asked her to leave her email address so that I can be in touch with her. We are also, as Western Cape, going towards, I think, Fisher, I'm not sure whether it's you or I even spoke about the World Food Day being around the corner. We are also preparing one event, but this year we're going in Serbrak in Overbeck next week, Friday. Yes, I'm busy with that, but I had to take time off to join this important meeting. Anyone who wants to support us, non-perishable food stuff, I'm building a biggest food mountain ever to be donated to that community there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sumusi. Yeah, great. And a call. I just want to reiterate, if anyone wants to get involved with the Western Cape's initiative next week, please do get in touch. I think, Sumusi, you did leave your details in the chat.
Yes.
And the point well made with regards to, with regards to involving business in this conversation, I think it's a point well made. And perhaps the team and I will definitely look into that and perhaps also engage with some of you in terms of getting the relevant businesses into the conversation. But thank you very much for that point made. I think Lobi, you also raised your hand. I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
It's Luby, right?
Hi, Luby.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's been very, very interesting to listen, and thanks very much for this. I work with local indigenous foods from the Cape, drawing attention to them and working to get them reintroduced into our local foodways and food system. I just wanted to, I suppose, endorse, in a way, underline what Tristan was saying about the importance of actually getting these networks integrating horizontally and vertically. We've just got the experience here in Cape Town where a local agri-hub, which has been working with small-scale growers, has closed its doors, which means that suddenly there's a whole lot of small-scale growers that are left unsupported in terms of reaching market. And, you know, without these kind of cross-sectoral, vertical and horizontal relationships, you know, I think they're vital to preventing this kind of thing from happening. And so I think, to me, it just underlines the importance of actually building strength horizontally and vertically so that this kind of thing doesn't happen, because we've lost an agri-hub and it's a disaster for the small growers who, you know, for whom it was a pathway to reach market, where individually it's very much more difficult for them to do so.
Absolutely. I think, the issue around market access is a big one, and I think a potential game changer. And I support and hear the call, so that I'm wondering if there's any response to that on the call. I think you also mentioned the issue around indigenous vegetables, and I think we also had a discussion around that in eThekwini yesterday. And I think Vuyo, you raised the point. So great connections. But thank you, Lovey, for making the point and for intervening and for joining us. And I think when we think about crafting these sessions in future, also involving those type of stakeholders and intervention and crafting specific actions that the government can support in that regard. Any other final thoughts? It's been a long session. There's been a lot of discussion points, interesting points. Ivan, I'm wondering if you want to share just briefly some of the sort of main outcomes from the session. If you want, you can also share the mural board, give people a visual representation.
Thanks, Ryan. So I just shared the link to the mural board in the chat again, and I would invite everybody to go have a look at it. I'm not sure if it's a great idea for me to share my screen and go over it, because there were so many interesting insights that emerged. Apologies, let me just switch on my camera. There we go. That emerged from this that I think it will be quite a mess. But what we will do is following this session to really look at all these different kind of key recommendations, questions, and reflections that came out of the session, and really draw the linkages and refine them into very concise strategic actions that could be used by governments for streamlining more integrated, coordinated governance, especially when it comes to the integration of stakeholders that fall beyond the realms of government, the ones that are actually exposed to the problems that we're trying to address, and really developing systems for engaging with them a little bit more thoroughly. But just as a reflection, having a look over the mural board, there are a few things that did emerge from the conversations, a lot of synergies and commonalities between what the different speakers spoke about. And I think that one thing that is pertinent is it seems, and we get the sense that in South Africa, there's a lot of things that's already in place that are intended to really drive progress with regards to using more integrated modes of governance to ensure sustainability in the food system and all the elements and outcomes thereof. But when it comes to the implementation and the actual work that needs to be done in order to ensure that these plans and institutions that are in place actually deliver the impact, there's a serious lack, speaking to this policy implementation gap that's so pertinent in the South African society. And I think through engagements like this, we could hopefully plant some seeds in the minds of key people that do sit in important positions and can have impact on these kind of frameworks. Something that I think for those in the food system space that really came out is the critical consideration of the changing the way that we frame food away from a product of production, a very rural focused approach towards stepping back and really seeing the food systems. And when one adopts this lens, especially in the context of what we're talking about today, one can see how the local governments already, to a very large extent, has the mandate of developing more sustainable food systems and addressing this monster of food and nutrition insecurity. And I think that's something that's very interesting that kind of came from this engagement, is that the mandate's already there, but it's just not really being recognized. And the question then is when this is realized and communicated through platforms like this, to what extent will the fiscal system respond to this recognition and allocate budgets to local governments to enable them to actually really make progress and drive change in this regard. Something else that came up across almost all of the presentation is these new modes of governance. Now, we're talking a lot about integrating horizontally and vertically, which I think on paper really sounds great, but it also comes to this question: exactly how do we do this? And there were some recommendations that came up during the conversation of establishing food system task forces that bring that explicitly intend to streamline this horizontal and vertical integration. These task forces obviously consisting of multiple stakeholders in the food system space. This obviously also then links into the idea of multi-stakeholder platforms, with some very interesting synergies that could be seen between this. And very, very interestingly as well, linking into this idea of integration, is how do we integrate the stakeholders that fall beyond the realms of government into this governance process. which I don't think there's any concrete answers to that, but something that really resonated with me was the reflection of, or the proposition of Tristan from the Western Cape around how we can still develop top-down approaches that really enables the agency of stakeholders on the ground to drive bottom-up development. This question of how can we bring this top-down, bottom-up approaches together to ensure that they operate in unison and really complementary manner. And then just again on this issue and perhaps a way in which this could be strengthened, something that came up is just the idea of mapping the mandates, the institutions and the stakeholders involved in the space. This question of just generating knowledge around who are in the space, what roles do they play, and under which institutional frameworks do they function. And there's finally also this idea that I think also fits in quite nicely with multi-level governance, is the need to strengthen cross-territorial, inter-city and inter-provincial linkages and coordination mechanisms to really build on conversations such as this, and to ensure that there's a healthy relationship between different geographical areas, to ensure that there's a large extent of synergy on that extent. And that's something that I think emerged from this, and I found it very interesting to see what's happening in the different constituencies. And just to close off on that note is the very interesting thing that emerged from this, and that highlighted the power of it, is to see how a diversity of perspectives could really contribute toward creating a more holistic understanding of what is needed and what kind of relationships are we after. Something that I think we could perhaps reflect on more, and I would invite anyone to that has ideas around this, is what kind of relationship do we need local and provincial governments to establish with the national government in order to ensure that we strengthen the role and agency of local governments in this food systems and the development of more sustainable food systems? What is needed from a national government point of view? What actions could they take today or tomorrow in order to initiate the process, at least, for strengthening the role that local governments play and are supposed to play in ensuring food and nutrition security for all. So I'll leave you with that, and once again, thanks for everyone for participating in this session. Cheers.
Great, thanks, Ivan. Yeah, I think with that, probably can close the session a few minutes earlier, which is sort of feels unusual. We sort of, I always find myself having to apologize and ask people to bear with us for a few more moments. But today, for some reason, we are finishing a few minutes early. But also just want to echo a big thanks particularly to our speakers and our panelists, and of course, participants for staying with us. It's been quite a long session, but I think very informative, very useful, and I'm really glad to see in the chat that there's been connections made, and I think that is really part of the objective of these